we can get started. Lynne, thanks for joining us. You know, we decided to do sort of these one-on-one interviews because, I mean, you know, in a forum where you have, 30 seconds to answer something, it's difficult. And here we could, ask follow-up questions. And what we did was we reached out to a bunch of groups who we know are interested in Board of Ed issues and said, well, let's do this together as opposed to, everybody doing their own interviews. So we have a number of groups on here. We have people from the MCCP, PTA. We've got students from towards Equitable Public Schools, Progressive Neighbors, Jews United for Justice, Our Revolution, and we may get a few other folks. But I guess we can get started. What I did was I asked some of these groups to come up with sort of their own topics that they were interested in, and I'll start with Delina or Amaya. They wanted to start talking about the boundary analysis. I know they had questions about that.
Hello, Lynn. How are you?
Can't hear you, Delina.
Hello.
Better. Okay.
Hello, Lynn. My name's Delina. I'm a member of Students.
It's very, very faint. We can't hear you hardly at all. I don't know.
You make an adjustment on the bottom of the of your computer, right?
Is that better?
A little bit.
Sorry for my audio.
Use your teacher voice.
Hey, hello. My name's Lena. I'm from Students Towards Equitable Public Schools, and we wanted to ask a couple questions about the boundary analysis. And our first question is, why do you think it is important to conduct the boundary analysis?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's important just as a matter of, it's something that we haven't taken on in a comprehensive way in decades. The school system's almost doubled in size since the last time there was any kind of comprehensive county-wide boundary analysis. And as somebody who's, been paying attention to these kinds of issues for years, advocates have been saying for a long time to MCPS, when we see issues of capacity and a school is overcrowded but yet one nearby at the same level, an elementary, middle, or high is under-enrolled, why aren't we, making a small boundary adjustment there to even out the capacity, use our money better, use our facilities better? And, there was never any good answer to that. And I think finally, and I think the students in some ways were quite instrumental in getting the county to say, absolutely, we do need to take a comprehensive county-wide look at our boundaries and where our students are coming from and looking at how we can use our resources better. And I think as a data person, my perspective is that we get this county-wide data, and I'm disappointed that the school system ended up not asking for WXY to provide recommendations because, they're the experts. You take advantage of their knowledge and tap their expertise as deeply as we can. And then the thing you can always do with recommendations is nothing. But we didn't even take advantage of that opportunity to get their insights on how we could better redraw our school boundaries. But I think nothing but good things can come from starting decision-making from a place of solid data, comprehensive, expert-derived, objective data. And then if we start there, if we use that as the foundation of our decision-making going forward, we're in a far better place than we have been in the past, which has kind of been playing whack-a-mole with, capacity challenges all across the county.
The next question that we wanted to ask is, what is your plan on trying to convince Board of Education members that don't agree on conducting the boundary analysis?
I didn't quite hear all of that.
She was asking about what your plan is to help convince the other board members who were not really that invested or supportive of the boundary analysis.
Well, I mean, I think the first thing we have to do is realize that every single decision the Board of Education and school system makes has to be student focused and student centered. And when we look at our school system, we are not an equitable school system. And so using the boundary analysis as a tool to help us create equity in our school system is something that we should all be invested in. I mean, we say equity is a core value of the school system, but our school system is demonstrably not equitable. When you have, you know, some elementary schools with barely 1% farm, you know, farms as a you know, measure of poverty, and some schools, elementary schools approaching, you know, 50% or excuse me, 90%. And we have high schools with less than 2% farms, and others that are, you know, in the mid 60%. There's just in that measure alone, we're not an equitable school system. And then we look at our performance data too, and we see that we have certain groups of students that are chronically underperforming, and they tend to be in our highest poverty schools. And again, we're not equitable. And I think, you know, what I would say to if I were on the board and working with board members, I'd say, look, this is the time. This is the time. Our students are speaking with great passion and great clarity. And they're telling us they are the subject matter experts for how we're doing as a school system. And they're telling us that we need to do better in so very many ways. We need to be listening to them, and we need to be focused on, again, being student first in all of our decision making. And that's what I would say to my colleagues is we've got, and you know, we have a lot of work to do to become more equitable. We have a lot of work to do to become anti-racist in our school system as a whole. And we have to start, and every single decision that we make as a board needs to be focused on students, on increasing educational and opportunity equity. And that's what I would say.
So one of the goals of the boundary analysis was to help reduce the amount of segregation we have in the school system. And I had a follow-up for that, which is, you know, years ago, the system created magnet programs, supposedly as a tool to help integrate the schools. And what you ended up with is schools within schools that were, you know, superficially integrated, but really not. And I'm wondering, you know, what's your view on that, on the magnet programs, and what their impact has been or not been on integrating the schools?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the impact has been to create some amazingly, truly stellar programs that are not equitably available to all students, and that are way too limited in their scope, and exactly the phenomenon that you mentioned, schools within schools. I think, you know, as a school system, there's so many things that we can do to make opportunities truly more equitably available to every student. Some of that's geography, some of that's programmatic excellence, some of that's in our communication, and some of that is in how we provide the opportunities for students to access programs. And, you know, we've taken some positive steps, because after the choice study several years ago now, we eliminated a lot of the hurdles students had to jump through to be considered for some of our more signature programs, especially in the elementary schools. And we took away the requirement that, you know, parents had to fill out the forms and all of these hoops that had to be jumped through. And we just made sure that every single student was being evaluated and given a chance to be considered for those signature programs. And I think when we get to middle and high school, when we're looking at opportunities like that, first of all, we need to expand them. So we've got great math science magnets at Tacoma Park Middle and at Clemente, but that's 2 out of 40 middle schools. So why aren't we looking at, and I think when we're looking at these really great programs, you know, in the middle school, our communication arts magnet that is at Eastern and at Clemente, and our math science magnets that are at Tacoma Park and at Clemente, why aren't we replicating those, franchising them at more sites, 3 to 4 more sites at a minimum, to make them, you know, geographically accessible, and to increase the sheer number of seats. And the same thing with our great high school programs like CAP, like the really great IB magnet at RM, which we're trying to replicate. My concern about that is sometimes, MCPS, we build the plane before we fly it. And so we replicate the program without the necessary, real quality controls to make the program not just replicated in a new site, but also equally excellent no matter where in the county the student participates. And programs like the Global Ecology Magnet at Poolsville, which is amazing. It's in Poolsville. That is not equitably accessible to 75% of high school students in Montgomery County. And, we need to take those programs, we need to franchise them, we need to replicate them at multiple sites throughout the county. When we choose where to site them, we need to be looking at, our transit as a resource. Now that we have Kids Ride Free, we need to really be looking at where can we put these great opportunities for students in ways that truly maximize the sheer number of students who can actually access them, because, you have to be able to get there. That's the first hurdle. So we need more seats in those great programs. We need to make sure, I think we need to continue to eliminate the hurdles to students. And, when we see a truly qualified student, wherever they are in our school system, we shouldn't wait for a counselor to recommend them or for somebody to advocate on their behalf. We should automatically be enrolling qualified students in these programs and let the students themselves opt out if they're not interested. We've talked a lot about that in MCCPTA when we look at our AP programs, trying to get more and more high school students into more rigorous programming, and especially our students of color, and eliminating that microaggression or that implicit bias that prevents members of our school community from encouraging those students to take those more rigorous classes. Let's just make the entry requirements blinded. Students that meet these criteria, and they're automatically enrolled, and then you ask the students, do you want to or not? And then you have that conversation with students, which I agree I would say too, it has to be a conversation with the student. I really think MCPS does far too much telling of students and far too little asking of students when it comes to things like course selection and opportunities like that. That's a long answer. So much, we could talk about this for hours and days, I think.
Are you
So we had a
concerned?
quick question.
Go ahead. Sorry, Amaya, go ahead.
We had a quick question, kind of what your plan for the boundary analysis was and how you're going to make sure that it's kind of reevaluated every so often so that we're not back in this predicament, every 30 years or so on.
Well, I am an advocate of the fact that I think MCPS needs to commit to a regular, predictable, systematic evaluation of our boundaries. And it needs to be, on a regular schedule and cycle. And I think that we may well have a tool at our disposal right now that we can adapt to allowing us to do that evaluation. And that is our, currently the County Planning Commission and functional planning, every 4 years, they have to do a quadrennial review of the subdivision staging policy. And in that subdivision staging policy, they're looking to how well our county infrastructure is meeting our APFO, our adequate public facilities ordinance. And the main thing, not the only, but the main things that they look at are schools and roads. And if we're already doing that assessment on a quadrennial basis anyway, and we're looking at where we're growing, where we're developing, is the development that we're approving or that developers are asking us to create, do we have the infrastructure to support it, or can we reasonably create the infrastructure to create it without overburdening, the tax dollars of the county and our capital budgets? Can we get the developers to pitch in equitable costs of that infrastructure? So we're doing that anyway. And why can't we get the county planning and the Division of Capital Planning and MCPS to partner really closely and really intentionally on that work every 4 years, and use that as an opportunity to really look at how are we doing, how's our capacity, how's our infrastructure holding up, where are we looking to develop, and look at making smaller adjustments going forward from time to time at a really predictable rate, whether than, doing something like we're doing now every 30 years, and lots of people are, up in arms because we're doing a countywide look. And, I think if it were regular, predictable, everybody knew it was coming, everybody understood the purpose, it would be something that, it would serve our county better, it would serve our students better, and it would be far less controversial.
But you do agree that part of the boundary analysis, one of the goals is to reduce the amount of segregation within the school system, to try to, yeah. Mike, did you want to ask about, you were going to ask about reopening.
Yeah. Let me ask one quick follow-up though. So, Lynn, you mentioned that the system needs to become more anti-racist. I'm just wondering, do you have any specific proposals on how we get there? Because clearly the system has a lot of structural racism in it, and we saw with this whole public forums on boundary analysis, we have a lot of blatant racism in the county that got exposed as well. So I'm just wondering, what ideas you have specifically to move us in a direction that's more anti-racist.
Well, I think first and foremost, there's so many things that we need to do, and the school system is starting that work now. When it comes to, creating a positive school climate where every student every day, well, let's be broader. Everybody in a school building every single day feels safe, feels welcome, feels valued, being their authentic self. That needs to be the day-to-day work of the school system. And one of the really untapped resources in our school system, as always, is our students, who are the subject matter experts about how we're doing as a system and what our school system is like, what their lived experience in our buildings is like every day. And I spent part of the day today taking some of my required MCPS trainings. And they're far better than they used to be. They're far more intentionally looking at a wider variety of inclusion that we need to be focused on, but they don't include the student experience almost ever. And if they do, it's in a very dry, didactic way. We need the students to help us write that training better. So it's truly, and we need to be reevaluating it every couple of years, so it's evolving as the student experience in our school system evolves. I think, we need to be focusing on a far more diverse school system and a far more diverse workforce in our school system. And one of the things that we aren't doing very well is growing our own teachers. So we have amazing students in the school system. And why aren't we doing a far better job of making them think, coming back to us as a teacher, as a counselor, as a college and career academy coordinator, as a coach is a great thing to do. Our school system, our school student body is incredibly diverse. I think one of the things that we have to do, we're looking at our curriculum to make sure that, it is fully inclusive, and every single student in every classroom sees themselves reflected in it. That's a piece of that. But I think one of the things that, defines racism in our school system is anything that we do, whatever intention, however well thought out or not it is, if it impacts students inequitably, and if that inequity is race-based, it's racist. So if we look at our SROs, we know that our SROs have the presence of armed police in our schools in the SRO role. The negative impact, I'm not saying that the impacts of that program are 100% negative, but of the impacts of the SROs that are negative, those negative impacts disproportionately impact our students of color. So by definition, that's racist. And so to be anti-racist, we need to look at taking that program out and replacing it with something that meets the same goals, but doesn't have that impact on our students. So, that just is one of the things that we have to do. But when we look at our school performance data too, I think one of the things that we need to do as a system is we need to make sure that if we are going to have schools that are in pockets of poverty, and we do, and we know that the performance data of students in those schools is those students perform less well. So we need to get the best possible teachers that we can in those classrooms. And when we have students living in poverty, we know they have all kinds of other challenges that don't necessarily happen in our classrooms, but certainly impact their ability to thrive in our classrooms. So we need to make sure we've got the best administrators in those buildings too. And as a system, we have been unwilling for a variety of reasons to make that a priority and to really make it so. We talk about it, everybody says it's a good idea, but we haven't been willing to come up with incentivization and things like that to really implement that program to scale. And maybe the community schools model, if we implement that with the grant that came out of the first, funding initiatives from the blueprint, maybe that will help. I mean, that community schools model is one that has a solid evidence base behind it for really increasing, raising all the boats and helping every student perform and thrive, perform better. And just so many things that we have to do. I would love to see that community schools model if it succeeds. And again, that's the watchword here. If it truly shows value in our school system, and if we really do develop an evidence base behind it, if we're going to continue to have schools that have poverty rates that exceed our county averages, I would like to see that community schools model in every school that student demographics exceed our countywide, poverty level as measured by farms, which is about 37%.
Thanks. So let me quickly ask the question I was going to ask that Scott probably thought I was going to ask. I guess, what's your initial impression of the plan for reopening schools and for the fall? And in particular, I mean, I work for Impact Silver Spring. We work with a lot of immigrant, low-income folks in the county, and we've seen that those individuals really struggled during the spring semester, and now we're going to be closed and remote for another 6 months. What are we going to do? Because that probably is going to contribute to an increasing gap between, these students and, other students. And, what do we do? So just curious about your impression and what you can bring to the board in terms of how we handle this situation.
Yeah, it is going to increase the divide without doubt. And we can be as well intended as we want in, making the technology available and being really intentional about trying to reconnect with all of the students that we've lost since March 13th. But you've hit the nail on the head. We have certain populations, we have certain groups of students whose families live in fear anyway. And this situation makes that fear worse. And so we have to be incredibly careful and culturally responsive when we reach out and try to connect with those families so that we do it in a way that feels safe to them and welcoming to them. And I think one of the things that we have to do, and I really do think that, and Rodney knows this because I'm sure he's heard me say it before, in some ways, we are 208 fiefdoms when we need to be a system. But sometimes we're a system when we really need to be looking at the individual needs of each one of our 208 schools. And I think what you just asked, Mike, is one of those times, because I think each of our 208 school communities knows best how to reach its students and families, and knows best what personnel it needs, what boots on the ground it needs to do to make those connections. So using our pupil personnel workers, using our parent community coordinators, using all of our school-based staff who are bilingual and have deep connections to those communities. We've seen great work happening at, my son is going to be a senior at Einstein, which is an incredibly diverse school, and we've seen some of our Spanish language staff have really helped us connect in great, powerful ways with our Latinx students and their families over the summer. And I really do think that's creating maybe an evidence-based practice that we can share out with other schools across the county. And there's other great work in individual schools around. I mean, I think the South Lake Elementary School community, they're doing great work to support their families and reach out to their families that can be hard to connect with because of those trust issues. So I think this is one of those things where the school system needs to focus on making sure every school has what it needs and letting each school decide how best to operationalize that connection process with their students. And I know, I teach at Edison, and we have embedded in and at Edison, the CREA program, the Career Resource and Education Academy, which is with lots of our students who come to us with extremely interrupted or limited education. They are coming to us at an age where we probably aren't going to get them to that high school diploma by that age cutoff. So they're getting a combination of educational, of education and career training, and building up to possibly getting that, being able to take their GED. But they're also a great community resource because they have got wide and deep connections to lots of our communities that are lower income and lower resource. So our CREA community coordinators are really working with their CREA students to make those students part of the team and helping us to really connect. And, our CREA student, one of the things about Edison, well, the CREA is now also at Seneca Valley. So, that program also, because those students come from all over the county, they are also a county-wide resource for us to tap into.
Thanks.
You're muted, Scott.
Sorry, yeah. I was saying Anita probably wanted to ask a follow-up question about SROs.
Yes, thank you. I'm with Jews United for Justice, and our allies who are all on this call and some who are not are as concerned as you appear to be about the inequities that appear when school resource officers are on campus. And I'm wondering how you would look at the data that's available, which is coming into the school board, I believe, on October the 5th, and how you would advocate for reduction and elimination of school resource officers.
Well, I think from the first instance, I think the data will tell us what we already know, which is that the negative impacts of SROs in our schools fall disproportionately on our students of color. And I think, and I want to be clear when I say the program is racist, I'm not saying anybody in it is racist. I'm just saying the impacts of it are racist. And I think that that is all that we really need to know. I mean, we have as a system very clear obligations to keep our schools and our students and staff in our schools safe. And that includes keeping them safe should the worst thing happen. But I think that, having an SRO or an armed officer in a school isn't the thing that we have to do everything that we can to keep our students secure if the worst things happen. So I think we need to take a comprehensive look at our obligations under Safe to Learn, because those are legal obligations that are binding on the school system. And we need to bring our students in a very comprehensive way into this conversation, and our staff. And then we need to focus on, figuring out as a collectively and very intentionally, the SRO program, Officers in Schools, needs to be replaced. We need to have a comprehensive conversation about what we replace it with. And look at the purposes for which it was established, and look at how, because there are a lot of really good purposes for which that program was established, and look at how we can accomplish those in other ways. And I think our law enforcement officers will have to be partners with us in that work, and they can be, and still not be, armed officers in our schools every day. And I think we can learn some lessons. I think there have been some best practices at some of our SROs and some of our schools. I mean, great things have happened at Einstein and Paint Branch, and we can still take those best practices and use them in isolation to build better community relations. But that doesn't have to be part and parcel of the school day in our school buildings. So I really do think there should not be anybody in our school buildings whose responsibility at any given time should be to arrest a student.
May I ask a follow-up question, which is that the school board received and began to implement a restorative justice program in 40 schools, and 40 schools were the boy, that word's escaped me. You know what I'm talking about? 40, yeah. And restorative justice programs have been pretty uniformly shown to work very effectively to reduce student-on-student conflict and student-teacher conflict. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that restorative justice needs to be implemented in every one of our 208 schools, but it has to be done. That's the one way that we need to be a system and not 208 fiefdoms, because we've seen the restorative justice program implemented in pilot schools and, you know, incrementally increasing the schools that are using restorative justice, but we haven't seen the fidelity and the excellence in both communicating about what restorative justice is, applying it in ways that are comprehensive and equitable. And we hear from some advocates concerns that the restorative justice program that they have experienced has been very unfriendly to the victims of some of the incidents that have occurred. And, you know, but that gets to, are we doing restorative justice right and well? And do the people that we're trusting to implement it in every one of our schools, are they trained and do they know how to do that work? And I think the case has been that that's not always the case. But we do have the in-house expertise, and we do have county partners with the expertise to make sure that in every one of our 208 schools, we're implementing restorative justice programming comprehensively and well. And I think those two things have to go hand in hand.
Denise, thank you for joining us. I know you had a question about the relationship between the board and MCPS. Do you want to turn your camera on, or can you hear me?
Sorry, Scott. I
Okay.
am drawing a blank on the question. If we can continue, I'll come back around to it.
Well, it was about the relationship of the board to MCPS. Well, okay. Well, I'll come back to you then.
Thank you.
That's okay.
Later.
I know, Ed, did you have a question from that you had wanted to ask?
Sure. So given the issues that we have with our federal government at all departments, we appreciate your, I'm sure everyone appreciates your emphasis on being guided by evidence. But, you know, in sort of this process that we have, you know, we really do want to have a great sense of where the candidates stand personally. So, I mean, you've talked about, sort of want to nail you down on SROs and what you think the best practices are. You mentioned best practices and I believe you said Einstein and Paint Branch that really appealed to you, and that they produce good results. So I'd like to hear more about what those results were and what those practices are, and how you envision that program going forward. And you also brought up community schools, and you want to see the evidence on that before you deeply commit to it. But I think it's also fair to say that one of the problems we've seen in government over the last 4 decades really is that programs and institutions are set up to fail often because they're not adequately designed or adequately funded. So, you know, they're given, you know, tests and they're bound to fail. So how would you, how do you envision testing community schools and getting meaningful data on what they can or can't do? And so it's a 2-part question, but thank you.
Okay, yeah, so I think, first of all, we need to make sure when we implement community schools, that we implement them fully, looking at the evidence-based best practices that are coming from other systems, and not do it halfway, part way, not do it with administrators and teachers who don't fully understand the model. And we have to make sure, and sometimes this is where MCPS falls apart, is the communication with community and families is just grossly inadequate. And, you know, we implement a program and nobody really understands it. Nobody knows what it means. Nobody knows how it's going to impact them and affect them. So, I mean, there's got to be implementational excellence on the beginning. And, you know, I'm a public health person. And so, you know, what I know is that you're going to have the best success when, first and foremost, before you implement, you have community buy-in. That you've identified a problem, you've identified an issue, you've identified a potential way to improve that situation. You have to make sure that the community with whom you're working shares that sense, shares your values, shares your vision for improvement. Then, once you have a plan in place and you are operationalizing it, you've got to do formative evaluation along the way. Way too often, MCPS waits until something is done and then they look back, and they don't take advantage of the sense that in so many ways, when we're implementing a new program, every single day, we can collect data on how well we're doing, and we can, you know, weekly, monthly, take a look at our main indicators for success for whatever that program is, and make fine-tuned adjustments along the way. You know, that's the one thing I would say. First and foremost, we've got to formatively evaluate these things as we go, and we have to make sure that we're really in a very comprehensive and substantive way engaging with everybody in our school community that's impacted when we're evaluating the success of the implementation and its impacts. And that means students, that means teachers and staff, that means the families, that means the community partners. If we're talking community schools model, they're community partners that are built right into the everyday workings of that school. And so all of them are going to have something of value to share when we're looking at what we're doing, how well we're doing it, and what we need to do to improve as we go. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to hear about the SROs as well. And I guess
okay, yeah.
Before you move on to that, just a quick follow-up on the community schools. Is there something that you want to see in a community school that hasn't been done in this county that you think, you know, the residents will benefit from?
Well, I think the community schools model itself is pretty specific in making sure that schools are served by a comprehensive set of services, and those services aren't just related to the students, but also to the families of the students. So, you know, we're talking mental wellness, we're talking health, we're talking opportunities for adult enrichment and growth. We're talking all of the services that families in that school might need to take advantage of, that they're located right there. And I think, you know, that's the model. And then the model for a true community school is also that you have members of each one of those stakeholder communities that meet regularly to talk about and guide the work of the school. And, you know, I've heard them called, you know, school councils and other things like that, but that is ingrained in the community schools model, is that body of stakeholders that meets and communicates regularly and in a very frank and candid way. So that's one of the things that I think that's essential. And I think, you know, we have, you know, grant funded to roll the program out in our 8 highest poverty elementary schools. And I have to be very honest with you, with the pandemic shutdown, I don't know where we are on that rollout. And I think it's been paused because, and Rodney may well know more than I do about that. But I mean, the intent was to start that, you know, with the beginning of the 2020-2021 school year. And I'm pretty certain, given where we are, not in person, that has been paused.
Okay, and on SROs, what did you think that makes Einstein and Paintbench stand out that you sounds like you think would be models to emulate going forward.
Well, I think that what it was that the SROs assigned to those schools built really strong, powerful relationships with the students. And that wasn't necessarily limited to their presence in a school, but with opportunities that the SRO made available to students who wanted to take advantage of them, and the SROs who really tapped those students to be advisors to the SRO in what the students saw the role of the SRO as being, what the students saw that the SRO could bring to them that they valued, and what they did not want that SRO to be doing in their school. And the SRO, I mean, that was a very honest and frank relationship, and that SRO, you know, did a job of making sure that he was listening to the students. And I think, you know, we need the SROs to be out of the schools, but to the extent that we do have law enforcement interacting with our school communities or over our school communities for any kind of a purpose, I think we need to have groups of student advisors that are, you know, working with that law enforcement presence, whatever it is, however it operates, on a regular basis, because it's the student experience in our schools and of our schools that is, you know, the bellwether of how well we're doing as a system. So, you know, having them taking on a strong, and I mean strong, advisory role, unique and individual to the students, not necessarily something that's, you know, with the school administration sitting next to them, but just the students having that ability to be frank and candid. So, I mean, those were and at Einstein, the SRO is one that he built relationships with students that were founded on some of his own, you know, avocations and in music, and so participated as a peer with the students in their orchestra and their jazz band, and, you know, in that way built some relationships that wouldn't have been able to be built if he were in the school as an officer. And I mean, those are just the kinds of things you do as a person if you want to get to know another person. And, you know, I think those SROs just were really willing to be people first and SROs second.
Thank you.
We have a couple folks on the call from Progressive Neighbors. I don't know, Anne, Renako, Wally, Walter, did you guys have any questions you wanted to pose?
I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about your background.
She wants to know about your background.
And also if through your work, you have changed your views on anything you've worked on. In other words, from your experience, have you changed your views in the period that you've been involved with the school board?
I didn't hear the second part.
If your experiences have changed your views on any issues, is that right, Wally?
I think he meant within the context of schools, you know, what your involvement with the school board.
I changed my opinion on issues.
On anything, yeah. Based on your experience, have your views evolved in any way?
Oh, good Lord. Yes, yes. So my background is my background in general is a nurse and a lawyer. And I also have an advanced degree in public health from Johns Hopkins. And I've worked clinically as a nurse, mostly in trauma. I've worked as an attorney at the Justice Department for 15 years. I've done some political work in the county, working for members of our delegation in Annapolis. And then this is my 5th year as a medical science teacher in MCPS. But most of what I know about the school system has come from being an advocate for the past 12 years. You know, my son is a rising senior, and I first started really focusing on our school system and the needs of our school system and our students when he started school. So he started kindergarten, and, you know, I did what a lot of parents do. I went to that first PTA meeting of the year, and they needed a health and wellness coordinator, and I raised my hand to volunteer. And that you know, that's how I got started. Within 2 years, I was the president of that PTA. When I became the president of that PTA, I got involved with the countywide MCC PTA. And through that work at the countywide level, and I spent 7 years on the executive committee as a vice president of educational issues, which is what Rodney does now. And I was terrible at that job. But, you know, Rodney and his predecessors, Cynthia Simonson and Michelle Glick, have been amazing in that job. And I spent 3 years as the MCC-PTA vice president of advocacy and almost 3 years as president. And that's the role. Working through and with that organization is what I think has given me a pretty solid understanding of our school system as a whole and its 208 school communities in it, and the issues throughout the county, some that are germane to our system as a whole, some that are very unique to a single school or a cluster. And so that is my background. And I would say I have absolutely changed my opinion on many issues related to our school system, mostly because as I've learned more and really committed to, you know, I like to think of myself as somebody who is very willing to learn from people who know more than I do about stuff and who really, really embraces the opportunity to learn from people who know more than I do about an issue. And that's, I mean, we got a tremendous number of subject matter experts in this county. Nobody knows everything, but collectively in this county, we know everything. So you can find out about anything if you just dig around and figure out who your subject matter experts are. Like a couple of years ago when we started looking at the lead water issues in our school system, and lo and behold, right there in our parent membership, we had an expert on lead in water, an environmental expert who stepped right up and said, I can help you, I'm going to help you, this is what you need to know, here's some resources. And, you know, I so value that about this community. It's just the expertise that is widely available. What I do not appreciate so often about our school system, our Board of Education, is the unwillingness to tap into that expertise that is often being offered to them. They don't even have to go find it because, you know, we go further, faster together. And the better we understand anything in our school system, the better the decisions are that we're gonna make. And I think a lot of my influencers have been the students, and I am so convinced that every decision this Board of Education makes, every decision the school system makes, the students have got to be, they have to have an equal place at that decision-making table, because they are the only ones who can tell us how well we are really doing, how well we are really serving the unique needs of every member of our learning community, every type of unique learning need, how well we're meeting the needs of those students and serving those students and creating an environment, a climate in every single school where those students feel welcome, creating an environment in every single school where students can see something or experience something that they should not, and they know right away where they can go and what they can do to get that addressed, and to make sure it's addressed in a way that is substantive, and that even if MCPS wants to hide behind, we've got privacy issues and things like that, so we can't be, you know, fully disclosive of what we're doing to address that issue or that concern or that episode, still the students are kept in the loop in a way that they know their concerns are truly being addressed. We need to build that kind of climate in every single one of our schools. And, you know, it's learning from our students where I really truly understand why it's so important for us to do everything we can to become an anti-racist school system. We need to do everything that we can to make sure that we are eliminating implicit bias from everything that we do, that we need to do so much more to increase the diversity of our employee pool, the people that are interacting with our students every day in our schools. The students are the ones, I think, that have, I mean, lots of people have influenced me in my thinking. Lots of the advocates that I've been so privileged to work with. But the students, I think, probably have been the most, have influenced me most in what I think about our school system and how I think we've done in the past and what I think we need to do going forward.
I think Denise has the next question. Denise?
So I'm sorry, I'm having camera issues. You can see my virtual background or you can see my name, but you can't see me, unfortunately. Actually, I have two questions. And yes, Scott, you're right. I was interested in the relationship between the board and MCPS. The board has not been, they're not really pro-equity. And I've seen that for 20 years. My daughter entered MCPS 20 years ago as a college graduate, grown and flown, but I have not seen a change in that position of the board. They're not really pro-equity. And I wanted to know, how will you work with them to get things done, and also the relationship to MCPS? Because, well, you've been speaking about this, but how we have to hold them accountable for understanding that they're obligated to the students of MCPS. And I'm also a parent engagement professional. So it's not just the students, it's the parents too. And I'd like you to speak to that as well, particularly parents in elementary school grades, to get them involved and to see themselves as partners in their students' success.
I'm trying to think. So starting with your last question first. I think one of the main, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I've been working, in PTAs for, 12 years now, and at very diverse schools, and cracking the nut of really making sure that we are inclusive and welcoming to every segment of our school community is a nut that it's been so hard to crack. But where I've seen it done best, you have to have a strong leader at the top that is very clear that parents and guardians and families are partners and welcome partners in this school and in their students' education. And parents need to feel like they can call the school, they can call the teacher, they can walk into, well, they can't right now, but they can walk into the school, be welcomed there. And I think too, that they see that the school values any time and talent that they want to share within that school community to support that school community, whether it's volunteering in a classroom or helping out with an event or, whatever it is, that kind of, and that comes from the top, the beginning of creating that kind of climate in a school that is truly welcoming and shouts that message to everybody in that community. You have something of value and we welcome you to bring that to us. I've seen, some powerful leaders saying, we are not serving our non-primary English speaking families very well, and reaching out into their school community and saying, and bringing in some of those parents as partners and even hiring them to work in their front office to help make sure the school was able to be far more welcoming and far more inclusive to everybody in that school community. But, and I think too, MCPS, when it's working with school communities, particularly elementary school communities, really all of them, MCPS as an organization needs to be far less patronizing in its communication and stop viewing the announcement of a decision as the beginning of engagement. I mean, that has failed repeatedly for this school system, and yet that has continued to be the model, which you have to ask, why is that still the model when it has demonstrably failed? When you look at the rolling out of dual language, when you look at the rollout of extended school year, it's right there in our face. The way that's been handled has not served the school system well, but yet they show incredible reluctance to do better at how they engage. And you talked about how working with fellow board members, working with MCPS as an organization. I have to say, I think one strength that I do bring is that because of the years of advocacy, I've worked with people throughout our school system, every office, department, division you can imagine on almost any issue you can name. So I think I have pretty universally built strong relationships. I think people would say, even if we don't agree, that I've been a thoughtful and a reliable and a collaborative partner who really just seeks to push the school system to do the very best job we can to serve students well. And so because of that underlying relationship, I think when you have positive relationships, that makes it easier for you to have the hard, uncomfortable conversations, which, let's face it, we do need to have within our school system in lots of different ways. Just looking at the Black at Instagram accounts that emerged from almost every one of our high school and many of our schools over the summer, there are some hard, uncomfortable conversations that have to happen in every single one of our schools. And when you've built a positive relationship, it makes having those uncomfortable conversations easy, but easier. And it makes it easier to hold each other accountable for really, really digging down and having those uncomfortable conversations. And I think the same thing is true at the board table. I mean, I share disappointment in some of the decision making and some of the lack of innovation and lack of energy that some board members have brought to the incredibly important work of transforming and evolving our school system. And I think I mean, I can't speak to the individual motivations of any one person, but I do think that as a body, the board needs to transform itself into a far more engaged body and a far less supervisory one. I mean, yes, it is the board's responsibility to set policy, and then the school system's responsibility to carry that out. But that doesn't mean that the school board's role should end with the setting of policy. I think the school board members need to be far more involved in the day-to-day of meeting with and learning from and directing and ensuring that you know that the needs of our students are being comprehensively addressed in the most effective ways, and not sitting back to wait and see as much as they have tended to do. And I think, you know, the role of the board on the Board of Ed is hard and probably thankless. It's paid almost nothing, which makes it in and of itself, the way our board is structured is anti-inclusive, because it's a full-time job to be done well. Let's make no bones about that. It is a 100-hour-a-week job to do well in our school system right now. 13th largest school system in the country, incredibly diverse, an incredible array of needs. To do that job well, it's 100 hours a week, and that's for a job that I think you're paid about $25,000 a year. So you have to be independently financially secure to even entertain trying to get a seat on that board. And that should not be the way it is, because that means that we are not a fully inclusive board, and we need to be. And so I think, you know, what we need to make just service on the board a more welcoming thing, something that seems more possible to more people. And again, it shouldn't just be retirees or people who are financially secure enough to take that hit and spend that time. And I think, you know, I do think we're going to see transformation on the board coming soon. I think, you know, several long-serving board members will not be running again. And that's an opportunity, but maybe not if the role of the board is still as it is, with the limitations that go with the salary and maybe the expectations some in the school system place on the board. But I think that if we're going to be the best system that we can be, we have to have the courage to transform every aspect of the work, and that includes the work of the board.
Yeah, I know Runako had a question about reopening.
Hi, Lynn. Thanks for joining us. Runako Alsop from Progressive Neighbors. I had a question about MCPS's reopening plan. I wanted to know, as a teacher, whether you had any feedback or your opinion on the reopening plan. Thank you.
Oh, yes, I do. Yes, I do. You know, I think one of the things, I mean, and hands off, I mean, MCPS has been working incredibly hard to try to make sure that we are, now that, you know, that we are rolling out the highest quality virtual learning experience that we can for our students. And how we're going to do, the proof's going to be in the pudding, and how we are, engaging our school-based staff and some non-school-based staff whose jobs just cannot be what they typically have been, because we're not going to have those students in school buildings. So how we're going to, operationalize those folks to serve students well and creatively and innovatively in this virtual learning environment, I think remains to be seen. Our bus drivers, our cafeteria staff, some of our media specialists, how are we going to, deputize them to really work hand in glove to serve students when they can't serve students in the way that they typically do? Some of my concerns relate to the fact that as a CTE teacher, and this is not new, but MCPS says they prioritize our work, but they don't in the way that they operationalize, and they don't in the way that they make decisions about the work and what we do. I think that MCPS, and I've said this in multiple forms and formats, MCPS needed to be partnering intentionally in mid-June with content specialists in all of our CTE programs to figure out how we could best deliver that content in what was then a potential and now a definite virtual learning environment, at least for the first semester, because so much of what we do, it depends on that hands-on learning. You can't build a house virtually. You can't rebuild a transmission virtually. I can't teach hands-on patient care skills and ensure my students have the competence and expertise to take those into a live patient care setting. I can't do that. So the fact that we've been pushing MCPS to work with us to create plans that would allow us to do some measure of in-person instruction hasn't really been embraced as is troubling to me. I'm part of a 3-person team who rewrote the curriculum for my program over the summer. One of the things that we did proactively was draft a plan and a proposal to bring our medical science students in small cohorts into our skills labs 4 times during the first semester for focused skills training sessions. And I haven't been able to get any word from MCPS about whether they're looking intentionally at that proposal. Although I did see last week, MCPS specifically said it was in process putting together a plan to bring small groups of students in for in-person instruction. They specifically mentioned special education, which is a need. But, I've been disappointed that I'm a subject matter expert on this. I'm a public health professional. I wrote a plan that is CDC compliant and more, that could allow us to bring students in small cohorts safely in partnership with our DHHS partners who man our school health rooms. And we created, also an addendum to that. Our proposal was built specific to our program, but with an addendum that would make it amenable to bringing cohorts of students in for almost any purpose. And that expertise was within the school system, and they didn't really tap it. I'm like, why didn't you tap it? Because we could have, jumped that hurdle already, instead of just now kind of looking at it and thinking about it. And those are the kinds of things that I personally have been concerned about. And, I think MCPS now, with these 2 days of online back to school workshops, they didn't call it that, but, lots of training that's available. But, I, as a teacher know, I need to spend a lot more than 8 hours a day this week to get all the training I need to make myself the best and most effective educator I can be in a virtual environment starting next Monday. And I think holding my breath, the one area that we've not heard any significant reporting on from these design and other teams that have been working about, putting together the plans for our fall instruction is Be Well 365. They're going to report out tomorrow. I understand they didn't report out earlier because their work has been so comprehensive and so detailed that they needed pretty much almost an entire board meeting to report out their plans. But so much of what they're going to tell us tomorrow is essential to what I and every teacher have to do in the classroom when it comes to social emotional learning and social emotional well-being of our students, and having the tools that we need to make sure our students first and foremost are all right. and then are in a space that will allow them to fully access learning once we're back in school. And, another thing that I haven't seen, maybe some of you have seen some numbers, but I am wondering what we're seeing as our enrollment numbers school to school so far, and looking at how those compare to historical numbers and to what we were predicting we would see a year ago before this pandemic, because that, I think, will be maybe one of our first bellwethers of how many students and families that we have lost since we had to shut down schools on the 13th. And I think, if MCPS can transparently share that data, that can help each individual school community, I think, reach out in ways unique to each community, because each school community is unique, in ways unique to that community, to help bring those families and students back in ways that feel safe and inclusive to those families.
Lynn, I had a quick question. I was wondering about your relationship, in the PTA and as a teacher with MCEA. And have you been active at all with MCEA? Have you worked with them? And how would you work with them while you're on the board?
So I would say individually, I wasn't as a teacher very engaged with MCEA because, when I started teaching, that, the first 6 months of teaching were I think I blocked it out, post-traumatic stress. It was so incredibly hard because I was writing curriculum every day because I didn't have one to start with, and it was a scramble. And then I became president of MCC PTA. And, my work as president of MCC PTA, taking over that organization in a time of crisis, my focus was on that organization and serving it as well as I possibly could. So I didn't do a lot as an individual teacher with MCEA, but as, an organization, MCC PTA, especially in the last 2 years, did partner pretty closely with MCEA on their parent engagement work, particularly, and rolling out and helping them to roll out their parent engagement surveys in all of our school communities, using our summer, our summer area meetings as an avenue for MCEA to get those surveys out and engage parents and families in that work. And then other initiatives along the line that organizationally MCC PTA partnered with MCA. And I'd say if I'm on the board table, one of the constituent groups that you have to work with are the organizations, SEIU, MCAP, MCEA, and working with them as they very specifically focus on the unique priorities and needs of their membership, and how you marry the unique and specific needs of those memberships with the overall goal of being a very student-focused school system and making sure that we are serving our students as well as we possibly can. And part of that work, I think, comes as a board member in making sure that all of our employees feel like that MCPS is an organization in which they want to work, in which they see themselves valued, and in which they feel they have a voice and they can raise their concerns effectively and efficiently, whatever they are, wherever they occur. Even if their concerns perhaps aren't priorities at that time of their representative organization, that there still needs to be avenues for employees to raise their concerns in efficient ways to the board and to the school system.
I know Anne had a few questions before. I know we're going to have to close pretty soon, but go ahead, Anne.
Hi. One of the first questions I have, I appreciate your focus on equity and kids. I also have a rising senior in my household, and we've gone through Rolling Terrace Elementary, Silver Spring International, and now Montgomery Blair. So we are in these high farms environment. Very luckily, she's gotten a fine education, but the inequities in the schools proper are very apparent when you've gone through the school system with the cohort of kids that are attending these schools. One of the ways in which I think the inequities are really amplified is because when you have this great divide between schools with many parents of means and others which are struggling to get by. The contributions that are made by the sports booster clubs and the PTAs in those wealthier school environments are very apparent. You know, I sat through an athletic orientation one of the past couple of years where Blair put up a graph of the contributions that are made of the parents in the wealthier schools to the individual schools, and it's shocking. So what can the school board do to make that process more equitable? Do you have any reach into the PTA or the sports boosters clubs that would make a difference? I used to say in these meetings a couple of years ago, and whenever I could bend somebody's ears, that if you went and you took photographs of the playgrounds in the elementary schools around the county, the disparities would be very painfully obvious. Because until very recently, there was a bunch of rusted out play equipment that no child would want to play on at Rolling Terrace Elementary. And if you went even very close to Tacoma Park Elementary School, there was an array of beautiful state-of-the-art equipment. What would you do to address those inequities?
Yeah, and they're real. You're absolutely right. And I think, you know, just speaking to the school play space, thankfully, I think that's improving now that so much of that work has been taken over by parks. And, you know, they are intentionally really funding, ensuring that every school has a really safe, adequate play space, field space. But, you know, in MCCPTA for years, we were trying to, you know, come up with a way to level that playing field and to, you know, eliminate some of that, the terrible, terrible, terrible inequities school to school. So when, you know, you have students at some wealthy high schools whose parents pay for the soccer team to go for a week retreat and training, and then you have students at other less wealthy schools where some of the soccer players don't even have cleats. And, you know, we've been working, and I've had these conversations even at the conference table with the superintendent when I was on the MCCPTA executive committee. And there was such an interest in let's come up with something that works, that could provide a real resource, financial resource to low resource schools in ways that they can access this funding for whatever projects they identify as bringing value to their school community, whether it's supporting, you know, the student athletes or whether it's putting on great programming in an elementary school. And, you know, the superintendent was really interested, and we came up sitting around this board table with different ways. And I will say one idea that I've seen bubble up and down for almost 10 years now, which I don't think is a good one, is this sort of sister school program where a wealthy PTA, you know, partners with a lower resource PTA, because that tended to be done in such a patronizing way. And I don't think it's welcoming. I don't think it's inclusive. I don't think that is a system that works. And, you know, we tried to work. We had a task group that was formed to specifically look at what mechanisms could we put together. And here's what I think is a problem, and has been a problem chronically for several years, is almost anytime you talk about, you know, let's grow some really good partnerships, let's go to our outside partners who really want to support schools, and let's give them mechanisms whereby they can support our lower resource schools in ways that they feel meaningful and the school community finds meaningful. And, you know, almost always that work has been turfed to the MCPS Education Foundation. And I do not think that organization has done a very good job of serving students well. And I know from my interactions and the task groups that were formed while I was MCCPTA president to work on these issues, there was a tremendous lack of openness. There was a tremendous lack of innovation. And it was sort of this attitude, oh, I will get people to write big checks and it will be fine. And you know what? No, you won't. And no, it isn't. So what we need to do is, I think we need, and I mean, I think the MCPS Foundation needs to be completely re-envisioned and reimagined, and I think it needs new leadership. And and I think that, because that could be a real mechanism that could partner with, say, MCCPTA, NAACP Parents Council, Identity, other organizations that work really hand in glove with school communities to find innovative funding sources. We even talked about, and Rodney, you may or may not remember this, maybe we didn't talk about it widely or at the board, but a couple years ago when we were thinking about this, we thought about, should we, MCCPTA as an organization, raise our dues by 25 cents or 50 cents a member? Right now, you know, membership in MCCPTA is $1 a person. And we talked about, should we increase that by 25 cents or 50 cents and dedicate that to a common pot that would serve as a resource for school PTAs to get grants to support whatever initiatives they wanted to support. And I mean, I think that MCCPTA and some other organizations would be willing to, you know, to really entertain that kind of a program if we could ensure that it was really, you know, uniformly, equitably constructed.
Let me just jump in a second. Other PTAs around the country that have similar issues have bolder measures that pool PTA contributions and more equitably distribute them across the county. Adding 25 cents to the membership, while laudable, is not enough. These inequities, I would encourage you to look at that slide that Blair puts up that shows, you know, the extreme inequities and how it affects the school in terms of their ability to offer, you know, athletic improvements and how long it takes to resod a field, for example. I appreciate what you're saying about the parks and wasn't aware of that. But the PTA funding, you know, I think some aspect of pooling and capping what an individual school can independently raise would make a huge difference. And, you know, that leads me to my second question, which is, again, I appreciate your focus on equity and the kids. But in observing this boundary analysis that the teens on this call have been mentioning, and that's, you know, forefront in the teens' minds, and in our part of the county, you know, we've been disappointed to see people stand up for their privilege and their property value in lieu of the kids. And I want to know, I appreciate, you know, everything you're saying about the need to address it, but the question is, what are the concrete steps that you can take as a board member and with your colleagues, should you be elected, to turn the tide and actually make a difference? What are the things that you would focus on first?
First, if we're talking about boundary analysis, would be, let's pluck the low-hanging fruit. I mean, you know, the boundary analysis told us some stuff that we already knew, which is that we had adjacent schools, level-alike schools, that could even out our capacity pressures. So we take that low-hanging fruit, and we know that that does shift some of the demographics of each of the schools. So that's the low-hanging fruit. We do that first. We make those micro adjustments. We even out the capacity, which will, you know, which should also help us with on the revenue side. If we get rid of portables, if we, you know, have less wear and tear in a building. Let's face it, a overcapacity building, the maintenance issues are increased over a building that's being used at capacity. And so that's the first thing that we do. And then, you know, once we even out, we pluck that low-hanging fruit, we see what that does for our capacity, for our enrollment, for our equity issues. And then we look at, I think, the next thing we need to do. I mean, and you know, people were pejoratively back in the primary throwing around terms like being pro-busing or anti-busing candidate. And nobody's talking about busing students all the way across the county to get to a school to even out the demographics. First of all, we can't afford it. Second of all, it'd be environmentally catastrophic. And so what we need to do is find ways to really make every school, I mean, I do think that if, you know, everybody cared about every school as much as they cared about their own, and if we truly could show that every single school is equally excellent, and you wouldn't have parents feeling like, I'm going to pay $200,000 more for a house to live in this cluster, that cluster, the other cluster. I mean, you know, looking at where our schools are located right now, I mean, there's some boundary shifting that can happen, but, you know, a lot of those neighborhoods just wouldn't be reassigned because of geography. And so what we need to be looking at is making it truly possible for every student in the county to access any program. If they want to stay in their home school, that's where they see value, that's where they see community, that's great. But if they see another program somewhere else in the county, it should be available to them and they should have the ability to access it. So that's where it comes to, we can't redraw our boundaries in such a way. We're a segregated county and we're a segregated school system because our neighborhoods are segregated. And that work is going to be ongoing for a very long term to desegregate our neighborhoods and re-equalize our housing policy and our transit policy, so we don't have these, highly segregated pockets in our county. But the school system in and of itself can't redraw boundaries in a way that's going to equalize the demographics at every single school. We can do some of that, but not completely. And so then we need to look at the programming and making all that great programming truly accessible and give the parents and the students confidence that the IB magnet at Kennedy is just as good as the IB magnet at RN. That, cap at, if we move, and I do think every one of these great programs should be at a minimum of 5 high schools. Again, geographically sited, looking at transit so that students can actually physically get to them. But so if you're a student and you're looking, I want to be in the global ecology and now it's at 5 schools, I shouldn't feel like the best one is Poolesville no matter what. We franchise the program, we franchise the expertise and the professional development that goes with it, so that wherever that school, wherever a student accesses that program, they know it's going to be as excellent as the one at Poolesville. Or we franchise CAP at Blair, and we know, students know, and parents know, and they have confidence, and we have the data to back it up, that program is equally excellent wherever in the school that they access it. And that, I think, is the work that is the way that we can, get rid of all of this your school, my school, property values, or start to get rid of those conversations and the loaded, coded, racist language that went with some of it, not all of it, but some of it. And that's how I think we have to do it, because we just can't shift the way our county, the population is cited right now. What we can do with boundaries is not going to get us across the finish line.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
It's almost 6:30, so we have to end soon. I just didn't want to end before I checked with the people that haven't asked questions. Brother Jabbar, do you have a question, or Rodney or Walter?
This is Rodney. I could ask a question, following up and expanding a little bit on, Lynn, what you mentioned earlier. You talked a little about incentivizing teachers and strongest teachers and strongest administrators to schools with the most need. So part one is, did you have any ideas about how to do that, especially with your background coming into the system and being a teacher? And related to that, and a little bit related to what Ann was talking about on facilities, there's compelling data that better facilities improves educational and health outcomes for students. And so how will you prioritize the limited budget that we have to improve our schools, especially the schools where the populations are most in need, versus the overcrowding that you were just talking about?
Yeah, I think, what you were talking about second, looking at, and who knows what the budget's actually gonna look like when we come out of this. But I think reasonably we have to be thinking we're going to have less. So I think you bring up such a good point, and that is the school environment has to be safe. And when I say, I mean healthy, safe. So when we're looking at the capital needs of our school building and surveying the 208 buildings that are under, that are serving our students, I think one of the things we need to do is look at opportunities while the buildings are closed. So are there opportunities we can redeploy staff who won't be able to do their regular jobs because their regular jobs involve them being in person in a school with students? But is there a way to innovatively, rethink their role and take advantage of the fact that schools are closed to get some things done? to make our schools, safe, to, make our buildings more environmentally sustainable, reduce our energy usage, make sure the ventilation systems. I know there's significant concerns when we look at COVID as a respiratory illness, and our HVAC systems in every single school primed and ready and as efficient as they possibly can be, so that when we do start to gather again in schools, we can be sure that we're not worried about recirculating air potentially spreading a virus that's airborne. So, I mean, I think those are things that we need to prioritize when the dollars are scarce, are those true systems that go to, is the school building safe and healthy for students to be in them? And I forgot the first part of your question.
Incentives for how to incentivize teachers and administrators to go to the schools with the most need. Yeah, I mean, I've been having the conversation for a while, looking at, let's do it financially. Can we financially incentivize teachers and administrators if we can't get them in other ways? And I understand that involves contract issues. And I don't know what contract negotiations have looked like in the past around getting MCEA and MCAP to agree that this is a priority and this is a way we can serve students better. And yes, we will incentivize getting our highest performing teachers and administrators in those schools. I think too, one thing that we can do, and maybe it'll build out of this intense recruiting program that MCPS is rolling out, to really look out and drill down into recruiting a diverse pool of talented new teachers into our system. And that could be, if we put really high quality teachers in our most struggling schools with a novice teacher that in some ways serves as an apprentice for a year, or two. So that new teacher, and I can say from being a first year teacher, it's incredibly hard. And one of the ways we get teachers, new talented teachers, to come into our school system is by saying, look, we've got this great innovative program whereby, all the administrative burdens and things of being a teacher, you're not even gonna have to deal with those for the first 2 years, because you're gonna apprentice with a really skilled, really talented teacher. And you two are going to work as a team for the first 2 years, and you're going to be able to do applied research on educational outcomes. You're going to be able to, write creative curricula. You're going to be able to bring your talent, all your unique talent, to bear in the classroom, working with your partner. I think that could be a way too to get really good teachers into our more struggling classrooms.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Lynn. I think it's been a really interesting and informative, conversation, and look forward to talking with you more about it at some point. But we're gonna post the recordings on YouTube. I think it's the Tacoma Park Mobilization is going to post them on their website. And I'll send you a link to both the recordings, and hopefully we can arrange for a forum sometime in September.
Great. Well, I just want to thank you very sincerely for your interest. I think that everybody should care about the school system and the people who are charged with making decisions about it. And we all know, as being very engaged voters, that that's not necessarily true. So I really do thank you for your interest.
Yeah. Thanks very much for helping and for participating.